Rory Christie, dairy farmer from Wigtownshire, southwest Scotland, shouting in his cows on a cold, wet and very blustery day. The latest On-Farm edition is an in-depth chat between myself, Anna Davis and Rory, after I took a trip down to his farm a couple of weeks ago.
Open the gate! Open the gate, I've got to get out the road!
Rory is a very interesting man in a number of ways. I've known him for quite some time. He's a board member of both the Milk Suppliers Association and the farming cooperative organisation SAOS. But more than that, he thinks deeply about things and isn't afraid to stand out from the crowd with possibly unpopular or controversial opinions. I think and certainly hope that most farmers listening will find food for thought in what he's about to say. Coming up, if you've ever fretted about farmers being price takers rather than price makers, Rory is a big advocate of learning how to properly negotiate, to stand up to big corporates or even landlords, or anywhere in fact where farmers suffer from an imbalance of power.
Yeah, that's something I need to do. I need to do this because I've got to negotiate with this big company, this global giant. And I've got to get better at what I do. I've got to be as good as the guy at the other side of the table.
Yes, yeah. Like more and more of us, Rory is searching for solutions to prevent global climate change, and particularly the positive role that farming can play in that.
The loss of biodiversity, the greenhouse gas thing. I really think farmers can become the heroes, not the villains of it.
Yes, I agree.
But people need to listen to us. But ultimately, while we keep cheap food as a driver of our economy, we won't save the planet.
And soberingly, he warns that farmers need to start to prepare right now for a future with fewer subsidies.
They'll look at all sorts of things around the environment, but it'll be a tiny top-up.
Yeah.
And it won't provide enough for your family.
Before we crack on, just a quick thank you to people who share the love about On-Farm on Twitter, Instagram and elsewhere. First of all, a thank you to Dr. Laura Winus, who was very enthusiastic about our organic oilseed rape episode a couple of weeks ago. What a fab podcast to listen to is what she said on Twitter, so thank you, Laura. There are too many people to thank individually, but we would like to again say thank you to AgriScot, SAOS and SOPA, organisations and events who are all sharing tweets and helping to support us. It all helps to get more people listening and sharing, so thank you very much, everybody. Now, though, on with the chat with Rory. We sat down in the Rotary Dairy Parlour at his farm, which is brand spanking new and installed this year.
So we're in the North Persalic Dairy Parlour. It was commissioned in 2020. It's 60-point Delaval Rotary, and it's a specialist grassland version, because the kind of dairy farming I do is pastoral, mob grazing, much like you'd see in New Zealand, but developed to cope with challenges that the climate of South West Scotland throw at us. You want to know a bit about our business?
Please, yeah.
So our business was formed in 1954 by our grandfather and grown by my father. And now my brother Gregor and I own and run the business. Gregor has a brand new, or built in 2013, pig unit for 200 sows, and we finish all the progeny for bacon through Scotland. We're a small marketing co-op of which Gregor's on the board. I look after dairy cows. We've got 1,000 at the moment. We have had as many as 1,500. They're our two main income sources, I guess. We also have a small Christmas tree enterprise and some cottage rentals. And we sell suckler replacements from the dairy herd and a little bit of what people call bull beef from the dairy herd, and lots of calves, occasional dairy replacements.
And I have travelled down to Wigtownshire to chat with you today. We've got the right equipment, so we're sitting 2 metres apart because we're still in COVID restrictions. Obviously, during lockdown, since March, you've not travelled off the farm very much. But before COVID, you were travelling up to Edinburgh quite a lot. Can you tell me a bit about your off-farm activities and what you're involved in with various committees and boards?
Yeah, over the years I've done a lot with NFU Scotland. I swore that I never would. My grandfather and father were heavily involved with both what was the milk board and then the union. And I saw the time they put into it, and I saw the pressure it created, especially when they're away from the farm. And I swore I would never do it. But a guy called Jimmy Mitchell, who was NFU Milk Committee Chairman, persuaded me to come and help, and at that time there were some very charismatic people involved, like James Withers, and I got involved in trying to help dairy farmers move away from the very bad situation in terms of milk price and milk price contracts. I then got involved in what was called the voluntary code of practice, and I worked closely with a guy called George Jameson and Kenny Campbell at the time, who was the milk tutor. And it ended up anyway, I was in the negotiating team to create what was called the voluntary code of practice. Eventually I was the farmer signatory on it. But I learned a huge amount at the time. The key learning was that I basically realised that farmers needed to work together, cooperate better. I had started to work with our milk buyer, Lactalis, on their what they call direct supply committee, myself and a chap called Peter Simpson, a great friend. And we very quickly realised how poor a representation of the farmers it was. It was shocking. Really, it was just a puppet organisation so that the company could meet its corporate social responsibility needs. Anyway, through the work with the union, I realised I needed to change that direct farm committee, make it accountable, make it independent, and I get help from SAOS, Scottish Agricultural Organisation, in particular a chap called Hamish Walls, who's helped me ever since. And to cut a long story short, we formed the committee, as it was at the time, into an association and then a full-blown co-op, producer co-op. So we have what is now called the Milk Supply Association, which I believe is now highly regarded and respected for what it does, and it represents all the farmers that supply Lactalis to the factory in Stranraer where our milk goes to make cheese. It's independent of Lactalis, it's financially independent, democratically independent, as a small board of 8 of us altogether. We have to be voted at a position. So we represent the farmers' voice. So that led me to do more with SAOS, and I guess today I try not to go to Edinburgh too often, to tell the truth. COVID's helped that, because a lot of it can be done by Zoom. But if I'm going to Edinburgh, it's to see SAOS, which I think is a fantastic organisation. Probably quite a quiet organisation that people don't realise just how much good work it does. But between MSA and SAOS, that really is what takes up a lot of my time.
It struck me, I know you don't necessarily use the word negotiation, but all of these conversations are about listening, and you've listened to Lactalis and what they need as a global organisation. But more importantly, I think, is that you and the work you've done with the Milk Suppliers Association is enabling them to listen to you, to understand your needs and what you want. Is that vaguely true?
It's vaguely true, yes. It's vaguely true. Listening is
in a more eloquent fashion, because that's what we're here for. You're the one that's eloquent when it comes to this topic, not me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you step back. One of the other reasons I go to Edinburgh, spent time in Edinburgh, is because I also trained as a conflict resolution mediator under the careful guidance of Core Mediation and John Sturrock QC, who's quite an amazing man, really. John advertised a course, as he does every year. I think it's called Mediation and Negotiations, a Route to Conflict Resolution. And I thought, here, this is something I need to do. I need to do this because I've got to negotiate with this big company, this global giant. Mm-hmm. I've got to get better at what I do. I've got to be as good as the guy at the other side of the table.
Yes, yeah. And
I went to that, and it was a really, really intensive 6 days, I think, doing this training. It cost me a lot of money. It was quite an expensive course, $6,000, but it was the best value I've ever had. It was possibly the most influential continuous professional development, if you want to call it that, I've ever done. I learned how poor I was at listening, and how poor most people are at listening.
Yes, yes.
When you're at a committee or whatever, a meeting, how many people are actually listening? They're sitting at the table thinking about their next answer, not listening, butting in, coming with their opinion. John's classic is that I get 2 ears and one mouth, use them in that order. They taught us how to listen, they taught us how to question, how to understand the body language, to question and understand people without actually speaking, to build rapport, to organise a room so everybody's comfortable. So I came out the other side of that, not as mega negotiator to be able to beat down Lactalis, but with a better ability to listen to them, to ask questions, and to try and find different ways, different solutions. That's a great thing John and his team taught is that there are always other solutions. It's never ever the best outcome you get. Hopefully it's not the worst, but it's probably the realistic outcome that you're seeking. So when we're dealing with Lactalis, who are a global giant, hugely powerful in our supply chain, as is many of the milk processors, the farmers are in a poor position in terms of balance of supply, often because there isn't simply enough milk. Supply and demand is often in favour of the processor. So it's a buyer's market, and it certainly is at the moment. So we have to find alternative solutions. It's not always about having the best milk price. It's not the best ever interest of our farmers to walk away from the table. But we do have to hold companies, and it's a huge, huge problem in our world today. Yes. Capitalism of the shareholder type is a big problem because very little regard is given to the stakeholders in the supply chain. I see it as my job to try and get the best deal for the stakeholder, the farmer. And Lactalis often don't want to go. They are not alone. I am not deriding Lactalis as a big baddie. They're just a selfish, big capitalist companies. And that's a fact of life.
And obviously the milk sector is not unique. You presumably have had similar conversations with arable farmers, with farmers who've perhaps got tenancy issues to discuss. This imbalance of power is the same across every sector of agriculture. And how do you think the skills that you've learned, if learnt by many others within agriculture, could help every sector?
Yes, everything I have learned and everything we do, the Milk Supply Association, could be copied for other sectors. So often people are completely blinded by what they want. They can't listen, can't think of an alternative, don't want to face their own reality. So much in every problem is personal, regardless. The biggest company, the biggest global company there is, it always comes down to the personal behaviour of the person you're dealing with. And 9 times out of 10, they can't or don't want to lose face. They don't want to lose face, whether it be in front of their boss. They don't want to lose face because they couldn't bring their bonus home to their wife. So once you start to understand the personal aspect, understand the person, then you can start to make inroads to the problem. And of course, there are many people on the other side of the table who are trained to understand that. And so they make it even more challenging for me and for others. And the tenancy sector, huge issues with landlord-tenancy relationships. That is truly personal for the tenant often. But similarly with the landlord. And basically there isn't enough money in the system for either. So often that creates an impasse. When there are very rich, wealthy landlords, then they need to consider their power and how they use their power. Because that's what it's about. It's always about power and how you use it. And if you find somebody at the other side of the table who lacks integrity and is prepared to abuse power for their own selfish gain, it's going to make a solution really difficult to find.
Now, how would you advise somebody who's not sitting across the table from somebody enormous, like a huge landowner or Lactalis, but somebody who's struggling with day-to-day discussions, whether it be staff members or what have you, but on a slightly smaller scale, because it's something that we all face every day?
The opposite of the relationship with the big global company is the relationships we all have at home. And I found myself during that course thinking about my relationship with my wife and my kids and how I make a complete and utter arse of it often. The truth of it, you can be highly trained as you want, but yet at home the difficult conversations are still hard to do. And I remember John actually saying, you can be a really good mediator, but you still need help to mediate yourself.
Yes.
And, so it is, again, as I said, personal. And if we start off by listening, trying to remove the passion from the discussion, that's often very difficult if you're a passionate person like me. Remove the passion, remove the emotion, and walk in another person's shoes.